Sinners has quickly gained massive amounts of praise since its release, with so many people holding Sinners in high regard, along with my friend Blue Nitro Shorts recommending this movie to me, who also, by the way, has a review video for the movie that I definitely recommend checking out. I decided to go and watch Sinners for myself to answer the question, does Sinners live up to the hype? I went into Sinners with pretty minimal knowledge. I literally hadn't even seen the trailer. I knew it had something to do with vampires and music, but that's about it. One thing I immediately noticed about Sinners was its beautiful camera work. The way the shots transitioned from one scene to the next, along with the way the pan shots and tracking shots were so fluently and excellently done, it was just beautiful to watch. I couldn't even count how many times I thought about the camera work during the movie just thinking about how good it was. It really helped reinforce the structure of the story through visual elements. And while I'm on the topic of the story, I found it really interesting with its ties to music and unique story. I really liked the choice of the opening scene where we see Sammy, also known as the Preacher Boy, after the events of the movie. It personally made me interested in what happened to him. I had questions like why is he so badly injured and what significance did the guitar have. I really enjoyed how the story used music as a way to tie in the supernatural elements of the movie. It made for probably my favorite scene in the entire movie when Sammy began to sing and play his guitar, and throughout the crowd of people dancing we saw all sorts of different eras of people and music and cultures mixed within the crowd, which tied directly into the opening sequence of the movie. I really enjoyed how they blended the people from the future into the crowd in a way where they stood out but didn't feel out of place. I also really enjoyed the foreshadowing from the end of that scene where we saw the fire burning through the roof. And all of this also directly ties into the camera work I mentioned earlier. It was phenomenal. Another thing that I thought was done really well was the action. There wasn't a whole lot of action in the movie, primarily two different parts. One being the fight against the vampires and the other being Smoke's final stand against the KKK. Both scenes were really well done, and I felt the moments during the vampire fight were acted out very well because of the emotional connections between the characters and their loved ones turned vampires. And of course, the fight between Smoke and the KKK was entertaining, yet bittersweet. I'm glad Smoke was able to kill them all, but it sucked seeing him lose his life to them after everything he had just been through. However, at the same time, I'm glad we were able to see him accept his death peacefully because he was able to be reunited with his partner and child. And speaking of Smoke, of course I'd like to talk about how good of a job Michael B. Jordan did acting in this film. He played two characters and played them both really well. I will say there was a couple of times where I got confused and didn't realize we switched which twin we were following. However, it only took me a couple of seconds to realize because Michael B. Jordan did a great job at portraying both the characters' different personalities. And while I'm on the topic of acting, I might as well just say I felt all the actors did a very good job in their roles throughout the movie. I also really enjoyed the characters like Slim and Cornbread as they created for some funny moments. Now, I went to see this movie with my parents, and on the way there, we had a small discussion about whether or not Sinners would be classified as a horror movie. I didn't think it was going to be, and by the time we finished the movie, I still don't think I would consider it to be horror because it wasn't all that scary. However, it did do a really good job at creating suspenseful or tense moments throughout the movie. Part of the reason why I think those moments were executed so well, or maybe even scary to some, was because of the sound design. Similarly to the camera work in the movie, I very quickly noticed that the sound design was great, but it got a whole lot better once the vampires were introduced to the story. And finally, to wrap up my thoughts on Sinners, although I don't really have any complaints about the movie, one thing I really would have liked to see was an explanation for the origins of the vampires, like where did the first vampire even come from? It's not something that's a big enough deal to ruin the movie for me or anything, but just something I personally was curious about that never got answered. And also, I do wish there was a bit more explanation for their behavior. There's a couple times when the vampires were shown to make their own decisions, like when Stack was spared by Smoke on the grounds that Stack wouldn't kill Sammy, which we see him agree to and fulfill in the end credit scene. So my question is, why did the people who got turned into vampires just immediately side with the original vampires if they were still able to think for themselves? Moving on to my personal rating for Sinners, let me first off quickly explain what I make my ratings based off of. First, overall quality, so stuff like the acting, characters, story, direction, filming, I'm sure you get the idea. Second, my personal enjoyment of watching the series or movie. And third, the completion of movie or series from start to finish. Essentially, do I feel like the story made sense and connected all the way through? So with that being said, I'd rate Sinners overall quality a 10 out of 10, My personal enjoyment watching a 9.5 out of 10, and the completion a 9.5 out of 10 with an overall rating of 9.5 out of 10. And to answer my question from the beginning of the video, I do believe Sinners is living up to the hype around it. I will say it could be considered a tad bit overrated, however, it's still an absolutely amazing movie that I'd recommend watching at some point. Thank you for watching my review of Sinners. If you enjoyed, please do consider leaving a like and subscribing to my channel for more content like this in the future. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.